when you got to a certain size, break off and you mushroom. She never encouraged big gigantic churches. She always encouraged lots of little small churches all over the place so that the truth will disseminate quickly and more effectively. But was North America to be the limit of the Seventh-day Adventist Church outreach? This little church that had begun only a decade or so earlier, was it being asked to reach over the seas, to Europe, to the islands of the Pacific, to all the world? The answer came in April 1st, 1874. Ellen White counseled, "You are entertaining too limited ideas of the work for this time. You are trying to plan the work so that you can embrace it in your arms. You must take broader views. Your light must not be put under a bushel." Isn't that something we can apply today, here, where you are in your church? Are your ideas small, or are they broad? Do you have the vision to take this message to the whole of this country? Or are you just quite content just to take it to one or two neighbours? This is what God is asking us. Are our views too limited? Or are we going to embrace a more broader, wider work? You must, this isn't you can, this is you must take broader views. Your light must not be put under a bushel, but on a candlestick, that it may give light to all that are in the world. We have to take the pioneer position that our house is the world. You know, there was the famous evangelist, John Wesley. Do you know what he said? He said, "My world is a pulpit." Is the world your pulpit? Or are you just content with that little small section? 6 months later, Jane Andrews, our first overseas missionary, sailed for Europe to pioneer the work of the church in Switzerland. And the work flourished. Pastor Andrews realized that the most promising way to reach people was through the printed page. He started a French missionary paper. Soon too, a publishing house was built in Basel, Switzerland. Later, the European work had its headquarters in this office building in Basel. Jane Andrews was a firm believer in the spirit of prophecy. When he did his work, he would get portions of the spirit of prophecy and translate them and get them circulated. But something happened in 1888 when Sister White sided with A.T. Jones and Wagner. There was a great split amongst the leadership in the church. One of the persons after that split, he from that point on rejected the spirit of prophecy. That was Elder Conradi. Elder Conradi came back to Europe and he headed up the work in Europe. And because of his prejudice against the spirit of prophecy, he withheld the insights of spirit of prophecy from the European brethren. And today in Europe, all over Europe, we find a suppression of spirit of prophecy and the principles. We find amongst our Adventist churches no problems drinking tea, coffee, immodest dress. We also find that our publications, very, very rarely do we have translated publications of great controversy, Desire of Ages. They're in very short supply. All the books that we have, they should be translated, but this work has been very slow because of one person in leadership blocking the message. Then evangelistic work began in the Scandinavian lands, and a publishing house was built in Oslo, Norway. You see, wherever the Adventists went, what did they do? They took the literature publications with them. Many souls have been won through the literature work. And this is something that we also need to think about and embrace and take a broader view with our literature work. To help the developing work, Ellen White went to Europe in 1885 and spent 2 years speaking, giving counsel, and helping the young church lay a solid foundation. The islands of the Pacific were waiting. In 1890, Seventh-day Adventists built their first missionary boat with Sabbath School funds. This sailing ship, the Pitcairn, was launched in Oakland, California, and their first target was the Pitcairn Island. And that's where they took the message, and the whole island became Seventh-day Adventists. Unfortunately, today on Pitcairn Island, I think there's only about 5 Adventists left in membership. And all kinds of problems are going on because I believe, for a number of reasons. One is they've moved away from our pioneer understanding of truth, and secondly, there didn't seem to be some evangelistic thrust. When there's no evangelism, when there's no missionary labours, you start to die. And I think that's kind of one of the things that happen. Very hard to evangelize on a small island, isn't it? She made 6 round trips carrying missionaries, books and supplies to the islands of the Pacific Islands. The building and selling of the Pitcairn Made 7-day event is very conscious of foreign missions. The overseas work now grew rapidly. In Australia, pioneer work was begun in 1885 by Stephen Haskell. Soon he and others established a publishing house. A number of them they had a handful of literature and they were giving them out, and they found it very hard. The people in Australia were very resistant to American ideas of the gospel. And they found that the work was very much hedged up. 20 years prior to Stephen Haskell going, there was a man that accepted the Sabbath after reading Signs of the Times. And this man, he went back to Australia and he asked for help from the conference. And the conference said, we can't help you, we don't have the manpower or the resources to help you. And this man, he basically, he gave up the Sabbath. He couldn't hold out by himself. 20 years later, they find now that the missionaries going there are finding it very hard work. One afternoon, Stephen Haskell and a few others, they were finding it very difficult, and they had 1 tract left. They decided that we're going to give up today. They got the tract and they put it on a rail, and they put it through the rail and left it and thought maybe someone will read this. This man came walking by and he said, "Oh, what's this?" He took it off the rail and started reading it, and the tract was about the Sabbath. Now, this particular man, he happened to be the president of a debating society, and he thought, wouldn't this make an excellent debate? And so in the following, I think the following week, he had his main debate whether the Sabbath was a Saturday, and as a result, a few people gave their hearts to the Sabbath message, and that was the beginnings of the Adventist work there in Australia. And they formed a church and it grew. Seeing the need for a school in Australia, Ellen White went to that field of labour and spent 9 years there in pioneer work. She soon called for a college in a rural setting. A 1,500-acre tract of land was secured, and the Avondale School was about to begin. It's also interesting after 1888, because Ellen White sided with A.T. Jones and Wagner against the leadership, they weren't very, very happy. And so they decided to send Ellen White out of the way, and they sent her to Australia. When you read the biographical extracts of Ellen White, she always said that I never had any clear direction from the Lord to go to Australia. But she went anyway because of the request of the brethren. But they wanted her out of America so that they could just run their own program. Avondale College. It has been told that when Mr. Benson handed the report to a member of the committee, he remarked that if a bandicoot, that's a marsupial about the size of a rabbit, were to cross the tract of land, he would find it necessary to carry his lunch with him. Something interesting happened with Avondale College. When they were looking for a college, they came across this particular land, and Sister White was convinced that this was the place to build the college. And they decided to spend a bit more time on this land, and they all felt impressed. Yes, we think this could be the place. And then someone in leadership said, well, we want a government expert to test out the land. And this was Mr. Benson. And Mr. Benson said that this land was rubbish. Sister White said that this land was not rubbish, this is the land to buy. So there was a lot of toing and froing. So what do? They think, let's have a committee. Whenever we want to do something, we always have a committee. So they had a committee, and the committee was basically to study whether this is the place we should go.